The Plea * Jake Thorne never expected his peaceful mission to turn into a nightmare. He was just a repair engineer delivering oxygen filters to a remote outpost on the edge of the Calyx system. But when his shuttle was hit by a freak magnetic storm, he lost control and crashed on a gray, ash-covered moon. The air was thin, the cold bit deep into his bones, and his emergency beacon was damaged. He wrapped himself in thermal gear and dragged his pack through the dust, looking for shelter all around him. The sky crackled with distant lightning, and strange shadows moved in the distance. He didn't know if they were alive or just his mind playing tricks on him. As he crossed a dead valley, he spotted movement ahead. At first, he thought it was an animal, crawling, injured, but as he got closer, he saw it was a woman alien with deep violet skin, blood on her leg, and sharp, curled horns. She was carrying something in her arms, cradling it like it was the only thing left in her world. A child, small and still, with pale skin and tight curls clinging to a sweaty forehead. The woman looked up at Jake with eyes full of fear and pain. She tried to speak but collapsed onto her knees. Barely able to breathe, Jake rushed over and knelt beside her, keeping his hand near his belt in case it was a trap. But the woman didn't attack. Instead, she held out the child and whispered with a voice that cracked, "I'll do literally anything if you help my son." The child's chest was barely moving. Jake tore open his emergency kit and pulled out a portable oxygen injector. He pressed it gently to the boy's mouth and activated it. The boy let out a weak breath, but his body stayed limp. Jake looked at the mother. What happened to him? He asked. Air. Not for him, she said slowly, struggling to find the right words. His lungs ... weak. He needs mix. Jake nodded, understanding that the boy needed special air, maybe something balanced between human and alien atmosphere. He adjusted the settings on the oxygen tank, making a custom mix as best as he could. The boy stirred slightly, his fingers twitching, but it wasn't enough. He needed medical attention, and fast. Jake looked at the woman again. Who are you? Why are you out here? The woman gritted her teeth as she tried to sit up. My name is Kalira, she said, her voice sharp but shaking. They are hunting us. Jake's heart jumped at that. Who? He asked. Soldiers from the city, she said. My son is forbiddens. They want him dead. Before Jake could ask more, a faint hum filled the air. He turned and saw glowing red lights in the sky, moving in a grid, drones scanning the surface. Getting closer, Jake cursed under his breath and grabbed his pack. He slung the boy over his shoulder carefully and looked back at Kalira. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded, though barely, and leaned on him for support as they moved. They stumbled through an old mining path, rocks sliding under their feet. Kalira coughed heavily, blood staining her lips, but she kept going, one step after another, never letting her eyes leave her son. Jake looked at the child's face, saw how peaceful he looked even while fighting for life. He remembered someone else with the same look, his younger brother, who died when the medics arrived too late. That memory burned in his chest. When they reached a small canyon, Jake found an old support tunnel, half buried in dirt and vines. He pulled Kalira inside and used his laser torch to seal the opening. With loose rocks, it would hide their heat for a short while. Inside it was cold and dark, but at least they could breathe. Jake set the child down on a blanket, adjusting the oxygen flow to better levels. Kalira watched him closely, her body shaking, her hands clenched tight. You're not one of them, she said quietly. You're human. Jake didn't reply. He was too busy trying to stabilize the boy's pulse. But inside, something in her words struck him. Kalira reached into her torn robe and pulled out a small vial with glowing liquid. She handed it to Jake. This will help, she said. He injected it into the child's neck and watched as the boy took a deep, full breath for the first time. Kalira let out a choked sob and collapsed against the wall. Her strength gone, Jake sat beside her, breathing hard. The child was alive for now. But outside, the drones were getting closer. He could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of machines searching for life. Calera looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. "You are the only chance he has," she said. "Please don't leave us." Jake didn't answer with words. He simply tightened the seal on the air mask, picked up the boy again, and reached for Calera's hand. They had to keep moving before death found them first. The escape asterisk. The tunnel smelled of rust and old fire. Jake moved slowly, holding the boy close, his breathing now steady but shallow. Calera limped beside him, one hand on the wall to stay upright. Each step was hard, but the silence outside didn't last long. A distant thudding sound echoed through the rock's heavy boots. Getting closer, Jake glanced at the tunnel entrance he had sealed earlier. He could hear something sniffing beyond the rocks, then a metallic clunk. "They've found us," he said quietly. Calera's eyes widened. "No more time," she said, and pointed deeper into the mine. "There's an old shaft. It leads outside the ridge." They didn't argue, they just moved. The shaft was steep, full of broken rails and cracked beams. Jake helped Calera down one hand at a time, her steps shaking as they moved. Lights flickered above. The drones were descending from the sky. Jake picked up the pace, sweat dripping from his face even in the cold air. At the bottom of the shaft, the tunnel opened into a wide cavern lit by faint blue crystals in the walls. Jake stopped to check Terran's vitals again. He was stable but weak, skin still too pale. Calera sank to the floor and coughed into her sleeve more blood. Jake turned to her. "You need help too." She shook her head. "He's more important," she whispered. "He is everything." Before Jake could respond, a sudden blast shook the cavern. The rocks behind them exploded, spraying dust and heat. 3 dark shapes stepped through the fire, tall, armored, holding energy rifles. Alien soldiers with helmets like skulls and red visors. Jake pulled his shock baton and stepped in front of Calera and Terran. "Stay behind me," he said. Calera reached into her cloak and handed Jake a small cube. "Throw it," she said. Jake didn't question her. He tossed the cube at the nearest soldier, and it burst into a wall of crackling green energy. The soldiers stumbled back, one screaming as his rifle melted in his hands. Jake ran, dragging Calera with him, carrying Terran in his arms. They slipped through a narrow tunnel that led outside into a frozen field under a red sky. The cold wind hit them like knives, but Jake didn't stop. He saw broken ruins ahead, stone walls, and ancient watchtowers half sunk in the snow. "This way," Calera said, voice weak. "That's the old resistance camp." Behind them, the soldiers shouted orders and fired into the tunnel. Energy blasts lit up the sky like lightning, but the tunnel held for now. Jake ran across the field, boots crunching ice, Calera barely keeping up. They reached the ruins and ducked behind a collapsed wall, panting. Jake scanned the area, spotting what looked like a bunker door under the snow. He wiped it clean and tried the panel dead. "Can you open it?" he asked. Calera knelt beside him, fingers trembling. She pressed symbols into the broken panel. Nothing happened. "They've sealed it," she whispered. From inside, the soldiers were coming, their boots crunching through the snow. Jake stood and looked around for anything useful. He spotted an old generator half buried behind a tower. Running on instinct, he pulled wires from his suit, connected them to the control pad, and sparked power into the door. With a loud hiss, it opened slowly, revealing darkness below. "Inside now," Jake said. Calera stumbled in first. Then Jake followed with Terran. He slammed the door shut just as a blast hit the wall behind them, shaking the stone. Inside was pitch black, cold and silent. Jake turned on a light from his suit and saw dust-covered machines, old crates, and frozen med pods. "This place," Calera whispered. "It belonged to my mate." Jake looked at her but didn't ask questions. They had to focus on keeping the boy alive. He set Terran on a table, connected the last of his oxygen, and looked Calera in the eyes. "What now?" he asked. Calera pulled a chip from a hidden pouch. "This has his genetic map," she said. If we can power the machines, we can heal him. Jake looked at the wires. Rust and dark screens. It's going to take time, he said, and they're not going to wait. Calera sat down and leaned against the wall, her body finally giving in to pain. I have nothing left, she said softly, but I will give all of it for him. Jake stared at the child's face. Peaceful for now. Then he looked at the doors, knowing they wouldn't hold forever. He cracked his knuckles, pulled out his tools, and said, "Then let's fix this place before they break in." The safe house asterisk, the bunker lights flickered to life as Jake's power surge flowed through the ancient cables. Dust rose from the floor, revealing old machines covered in frost and age. Calera sat slumped against the wall, her breath shallow, her eyes on her son. Taran lay on a steel table, his small body unmoving but warm again. Jake had rerouted energy from his suit into a backup generator and connected it to a medical cradle. The child now breathed under a glowing field of light. Surrounded by blinking symbols and readings, it wasn't perfect, but it was keeping him alive. Jake moved fast between the machines, trying to understand their alien language. Each console was half-functional, screens cracked, controls worn out from years of silence. He worked with his hands, letting muscle memory guide him, combining alien tech with human tools. Calera watched silently, her fingers gripping her cloak, her heart racing with hope and fear. When one of the larger monitors blinked on and displayed Taran's pulse, she let out a long breath. "He's stabilizing," she whispered. Jake nodded but didn't stop working. "These systems are running on scrap and memory," he said. "But if I keep pushing, we can get the automed unit to work fully." Calera slowly stood and walked to an old locker in the corner. Inside were sealed boxes, rations, data drives, broken weapons. She opened a metal container and found what she had. Buried long ago, a crystal cube glowing with soft blue light. She brought it to Jake. "This has his history, his code, his origin." Jake took the cube and inserted it into the console. The screen flickered, then showed something that stunned him. Taran's DNA was not only alien, but also fused with human. "Genetic code, you weren't joking," he said slowly. "He's hybrid." Calera nodded. "Your people helped us once, long ago during the rebellion," she said. "We tried to build children who could survive the dying air, who could lead a new generation." Jake stared at the screen, now showing multiple genetic strands merging and adapting. "But the regime feared what you made," he said. "They called it unnatural, a threat." Calera's eyes darkened. "They killed the others. Hunted mothers like me, erased all records," she said. "I ran because he was the last." Jake looked at Taran again, now breathing stronger, his skin returning to a gentle color. "Why does he need me?" Jake asked. "You're human, but I'm no doctor." Calera placed her hand on his shoulder. "Because the human part of him responds to your tech, your touch, your care. He needs both sides." A soft alert buzzed from the panel and exterior. Motion sensor triggered. Jake stood fast and checked the screen. "Something's moving out there," he said. Calera moved to the wall and opened a vent, revealing a narrow path leading deeper underground. "If they break in, we go this way," she said. Jake nodded, already packing supplies and rewiring portable medlinks to Taran's body before they could move. The screen blinked with a strange message, an old Earth Alliance distress signal buried in the system. Jake tapped it, and a message appeared, recorded 20 years ago. It was a video of a human captain standing beside Calera's late mate. They spoke of hope, peace, and cooperation, of building something new. Jake's face tightened. "This bunker was meant for more than hiding," he said. Calera nodded slowly. "It was the seed of something better." The child stirred on the table, his small hand reaching out. Jake stepped closer and took it. Feeling warmth and life, he looked at Calera. "We're not running anymore," he said. "Not if this boy can change everything." Calera leaned down and kissed her son's forehead. "Then we make our stand here," she said. Jake smiled faintly and started sealing the entrance with a new energy field. They had tech, they had proof, and for the first time they had a chance. The snow above the bunker began to fall heavier as the sky turned red with the approach of hostile ships. But underground, a mother, a human and a hybrid boy held onto a quiet breath of survival. And far beyond the planet, a faint ping from the old signal reached the stars. The bounty hunter asterisk, the ground above shook like thunder was crawling through stone. Jake paused mid-repair as fine dust rained from the bunker ceiling. Kalera's eyes narrowed, her body tense even in weakness. "They've sent him," she whispered. Jake looked up from the power console. "Who?" he asked. Kalera's lips trembled. "Zarvax," she said, "the butcher of the rebellion." A sharp whine filled the bunker, an electronic screech, followed by metallic scratching at the outer gate. Jake sprinted to the security feed, though. Most of the cameras were dead. One flickered on. A single figure stood outside, cloaked in thick black armor that shimmered with heat. He was tall, heavier than any soldier they had seen before. His helmet had no face, only a glowing red slit where eyes should be. He carried twin plasma blades strapped to his back and an energy lance humming at his hip. Jake didn't need subtitles to read danger. Kalera stepped beside him, her face pale but set like stone. "He doesn't take prisoners," she said. "He enjoys the hunt." Jake checked his tool belt. All he had was a shock baton, 2 grenades, and an old pulse gun with a cracked barrel. "That's not enough," he muttered. Kalera opened a hidden crate near the medbed and pulled out a curved weapon. "This was my mate's," she said. "Take it." The weapon felt warm in Jake's hands, part blade, part stun rod, pulsing with energy as if it remembered war. Outside, Zarvax began cutting through the outer door with a wide laser arc. Sparks sprayed in all directions. They had minutes, maybe less. Jake ran back to Terren. Still resting in the med cradle, he gently disconnected the cradle from the table and activated its hover mode. "We're not leaving him behind," Jake said. Kalera grabbed the crystal cube and nodded. As the blast door buckled, Jake led them through the rear tunnel Kalera had opened earlier. It was narrow and twisted downward like a spine behind them. A loud boom echoed. Zarvax was in. His footsteps were heavy and slow, like he was giving them time to panic. Jake didn't panic. He focused on every step, calculating, scanning, remembering the path they saw in the resistance map. They emerged into a lower corridor flooded with water. Jake pulled Kalera onto a floating slab while guiding Terren's cradle through the muck. Behind them, the hunter's red light reflected. On the water's surface, Kalera coughed again. "We need to split up," she said. Jake shook his head. No chance. At the far end of the corridor, they found a vertical shaft leading up to a surface vent. Jake boosted Kalera first, then lifted Terren's cradle with a rope. Before he could climb, Zarvax stepped into view, blocking the path with a quiet, terrifying calm. "You carry stolen blood," Zarvax said through his voice modulator. "The sentence is erasure." Jake didn't answer. He fired his pulse gun directly into Zarvax's helmet. The hunter didn't flinch. He caught the shot mid-air with a gravity field and hurled it back, missing Jake's head by inches. Jake threw one of the grenades at the floor between them and leapt into the shaft. The blast roared behind him as he pulled himself up, fingers burning, lungs tight. Kalera helped drag him through the vent into the open cold. They now stood on a ledge overlooking a canyon of frozen rivers and shattered towers. Zarvax emerged from below scarred, one shoulder plate cracked, sparks leaking from his armor. Jake looked around and found something, an old anti-vehicle turret buried in snow. He ran to it, powering it with the last energy cell from his suit. The turret came to life with a deep hum, locked on Zarvax, and fired a kinetic burst that slammed into the hunter. Zarvax tumbled backward into the quay, ice roaring in anger as he vanished into a collapsing slope. The ground crumbled, and silence returned. Jake staggered back, breath heavy, face numb from the cold. Kalera knelt beside Terren, brushing his hair. "You protected him," she said. Jake nodded. "And I'm not done yet." In the distance they spotted a tall metal tower rising above the clouds. The old rebel signal relay. Their next hope. Jake turned to Kalira. "If we reach that tower, I can send a message to Earth." She looked at the child, then at Jake. "Then that is where we go." The hidden base asterisk. The wind screamed as they moved along the ridge. Snow whipped across Jake's visor, hiding the edges of cliffs and cracks in the ice. Kalira's legs shook with every step, but she never let go of Terran's hover cradle. Jake walked ahead, clearing paths with his boot, watching the signal tower get closer through the storm. The tower's steel spine stretched high into the sky. Surrounded by buried ruins and broken satellite dishes, it looked dead. But Jake knew old machines could still breathe. When they reached the base of the tower, Kalira pointed to a narrow entrance half covered in ice. "Underneath," she said. Jake melted the ice with a torch, pried open the hatch and climbed down. Inside was a long metal tunnel that echoed with every breath. Frost coated the walls, and old Earth symbols were barely visible under the ice. Jake wiped them clean with his glove and stared. "This wasn't alien," he said. "This was built by humans." Kalira nodded slowly. "The first alliance came here years ago," she said. "They helped us build safe zones, hidden labs and broadcast towers. Then they left." Jake didn't reply. He kept moving, his boots clicking against rusted floors. They passed old control panels, sleeping pods, and storage rooms filled with broken crates. In one chamber, they found a backup generator offline but intact. Jake worked fast, rerouting power from his suit's backup cell. The lights flickered, then stayed on with a low hum. Screens glowed, fans turned, and the temperature slowly began to rise. Kalira sat near the console, her hands shaking from exhaustion. Jake placed a heat blanket over her and knelt beside Taran. The boy stirred in the cradle, blinking slowly. For the first time he whispered, "Mother." Kalira's breath caught in her throat. She leaned over and kissed her son's forehead, eyes full of silent joy. Jake watched the moment, then turned to the command panel. "Let's see if this place can still talk to the stars," he said. He connected the Earth beacon to the satellite uplink and typed in a call sign. Seconds passed, then a green light flashed. The signal was live. He recorded a message. "This is Jake Thorne, human engineer, located on Outpost X-47. I found a survivor carrying genetic data that could change everything. Requesting immediate extraction and medical aid. Coordinates uploading now." He pressed send and watched the signal rise into the sky. One message, one hope. Suddenly, the console beeped again, this time warning of motion at the outer perimeter. Jake checked the feed and saw armored figures climbing toward the tower. Kalira stood, her face cold and focused. "They're back," she said. Jake locked the inner door, activated all remaining defenses, and prepared for the worst. "How long can we hold them?" he asked. Kalira walked to a nearby crate and pulled out a curved rifle. "Long enough," she said. Outside, the wind howled louder as the hunters arrived, led by a familiar shadow Zarvax. His armor was damaged, one arm sparking, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. Jake and Kalira stood beside the cradle, guarding the child who now breathed stronger than before. Jake looked at her and said, "No more running." Kalira nodded. "This is where it ends." In the tower's central room, hidden behind a wall panel, Jake discovered one last secret. A medical pod labeled Hybrid Protocol 1, still powered, still clean. He opened it and carefully placed Tareen inside. The pod sealed with a hiss and scanned the child's DNA. Kalira read the screen and gasped. "The pod is repairing his lungs, enhancing his blood. It's working." Alarms blared through the base as Zarvax breached the outer walls. Jake picked up the shock rifle and took cover behind a console. Kalira crouched beside a defense turret and activated its auto-targeting system. Terran rested inside the pod, unaware of the war about to reach him. But his pulse was steady, his face calm. and the screen above him showed a word in human language, processing. As the first shots rang out and sparks flew across the chamber, Jake whispered to himself, "Just give me 10 minutes, kid. That's all I need." The sacrifice asterisk. The first explosion shook the floor. Panels burst from the ceiling, and warning lights turned blood red. Jake rolled to cover, shielding Terran's pod with his body. Kalira fired the turret, her hand steady even as blood ran. From her side, Zarvax stepped into the chamber like a demon born from fire. One eye cracked, armor dented, but his steps full of purpose. He raised his lance and pointed it at the child. "The experiment ends now," Zarvax growled. Jake stood between him and the pod, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the monster. "Not while I breathe," Jake said. Zarvax charged, energy blade igniting with a scream of heat. Jake dodged left, firing rapid bursts, sparks bouncing off Zarvax. Armor. Kalira leapt into the fight, slashing with her father's blade. Metal screamed against metal as their weapons clashed in bursts of fire. Zarvax was too strong, too fast. He grabbed Jake by the chest and slammed him against a wall. Jake coughed blood but pulled a shock spike from his belt and jabbed it into the hunter's arm. Electricity crackled, shorting Zarvax's gauntlet. Kalira took the chance. She fired directly into his faceplate. Glass shattered, exposing pale skin and black veins. Zarvax roared and threw Kalira across the room, her body slamming into the steel floor. She didn't get up. Jake crawled toward her, calling her name. She opened her eyes, barely, and whispered, "Protect him." The pod beeped, louder and faster. Terran's vitals were stabilizing, his body glowing softly in the healing mist. Zarvax limped toward it, fury in his broken face. Jake stood again, weak but standing. He aimed the last grenade he had not at Zarvax, but at the floor between them. "Let's see how heavy that armor really is," Jake said. He dropped the grenade and ran, pulling Kalira behind the control desk. The blast tore the center of the room apart. The floor caved in, fire swallowing Zarvax as he fell into the black pit below. Silence returned, except for the hum of the pod. Jake sat against the wall, breathing hard, eyes on the boy. Taran was alive. Kalira was fading. Her blood loss was too much. Jake knelt beside her, holding her hand. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved him." She smiled weakly. "You helped me believe again," she said. "You weren't like the others. You saw a child, not a weapon." Jake held her tighter. "You don't have to go." But she shook her head. "I gave everything so he could live," she said. "That's what mothers do." She pressed the memory crystal into Jake's palm. "Give it to him when he's ready. He deserves to know who he is." Her eyes drifted to the pod, where her son now slept in safety. She smiled one last time, then closed her eyes forever. The tower shook again. Not from battle, but from a descending ship. Jake stepped outside into the falling snow, blinking up at the bright lights. A human rescue vessel hovered overhead, its engines humming with life. A voice crackled through his cum. "This is Earth Vessel Horizon. We received your signal. Identify yourself." Jake looked up, voice steady and clear. "Jake Thorne," he said. "I'm bringing home something worth everything." He watched as the landing ramp opened and medical teams rushed out. He led them to the pod, guarding it like a shield until they took it in their hands. They looked at the readings and gasped. "This boy could rewrite our understanding of biology." One doctor said. Jake nodded slowly. "Then you better treat him like a miracle." The future asterisk. The sun rose over the green hills of New Terra. For the first time in a generation, the skies were clear. Birds flew beside alien wind gliders, and the air smelled of life instead of smoke. Children laughed near the river, chasing lightbugs across the tall grass. Among them ran a boy with soft curls and violet eyes. His name was Taran. He wore a jacket with the Earth insignia on one shoulder and Kalira's family crest on the other. His lungs were strong now, his heart full of light. He had survived the storm, carried by a promise and protected by sacrifice. In the distance, Jake Thorne watched him from a hill, arms crossed, quiet pride in his chest. He was older now, his uniform faded. But his eyes still sharp, he had kept his word. Behind him stood the Unity Hall, a center built by both humans and aliens. Inside were labs, schools, healing centers, and archives filled with the knowledge that once had to be hidden in one of those rooms sat a crystal cube, Calera's last gift. Taren had not opened it yet, but the day was coming. Jake knew the boy would be ready on the horizon. Earth ships flew in formation with alien cruisers. They no longer pointed weapons at each other. They carried food, medicine, builders, and dreams. The rebellion had ended not in fire, but in a child's breath. Ambassadors visited from other systems. They came to see the hybrid boy who had survived extinction. Taren didn't speak much to them. He preferred building tree forts and painting the sky with plasmakites, but when he did speak, they listened. Because his voice held both history and hope, Jake walked through the village as locals waved and children ran to him. Some called him Captain, others called him Uncle Jake. He always smiled but never took credit. He knew the real hero had horns, soft eyes, and the courage to run with a dying child in her arms. Every year, he placed flowers by her statue tall, proud, carved in stone. The plaque read, Calera, Mother of the Future. One evening, as the stars filled the sky, Taren sat beside Jake near the old bunker ship now turned into a museum. Will you tell me again? The boy asked. Jake looked at him and nodded. The whole story? Taren smiled. From the beginning, so Jake spoke of fire and snow, of a mother's plea and a human's choice. He told him about Zarvax, about the broken base, the pod, the fight, and the message to Earth. Taren listened quietly, then asked, And why did you help us when we were strangers? Jake looked at him and said, Because your mother believed you deserved to live. And she was right. Taren leaned against Jake's shoulder, eyes closed. One day I'll help others too, he said. Jake placed a hand on the boy's head. You already are. As the night deepened, the stars shifted above one, blinking gently. A signal from a far-off system. Jake watched it, knowing more would come. More children, more mothers, more like Calera and Taren. And this time, humanity would not look away. The camera pulled back, rising above the hill, above the trees, above the rebuilt world. A world where two species became one family. And it all began with a mother's voice saying, I'll do literally anything if you help my son. The end.